There are drinks in this world that shouldn't exist. Recipes that get passed down like curses, written on napkins stained with something darker than whiskey. I found one of those recipes in Pueblo, Colorado, tucked inside a leather-bound journal I discovered behind a false panel in the bar's cellar. The drink was called the Hellfire Shaker, and the last entry in that journal was dated 3 days before the previous bartender vanished without a trace. My name's Jason Fox, and I've been pouring drinks in bars across America for over 2 decades. I've heard thousands of stories, but there are some that you just can't forget. This is one of those. Before we continue, I'd like to know, what state are you listening from tonight? Drop your city or state in the comments below. I love knowing these stories reach people all across the country. All right, back to that journal. I'd taken a job at the Amber Current in late September. The place was a dive bar on the south side, tucked between an auto repair shop and a laundromat that had been closed for years. The owner, a guy named Duncan Lowell, was desperate for experienced help. His previous bartender had quit suddenly, he told me. Left his keys on the bar one night and never came back. Duncan offered me 20% more than I'd made in Louisville, so I took it without asking too many questions. That was my first mistake. The Amber Current had good bones, though. High-pressed tin ceilings, original mahogany bar from the 1920s, vintage bottles displayed on shelves made from reclaimed mining equipment. Duncan explained that the building used to be a speakeasy during Prohibition, then a union hall, then nothing for about 30 years before he bought it. The basement still had the original brick walls and iron fixtures from when it served as a storage facility for the mines nearby. I spent my first week learning the regulars and restocking the inventory. Duncan was particular about organization. He had a system for everything, color-coded labels on every bottle, handwritten cards cataloging what went where. But he never went down to the cellar. When I asked about extra stock one busy Friday night, he told me there was nothing down there worth keeping. The way his jaw tightened when he said it made something cold settle in my stomach. It was my second Wednesday when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, like burnt sugar mixed with copper. It came from the floor drain behind the bar during the slower afternoon shifts, strongest around 3 in the afternoon. I mentioned it to Duncan, but he waved it off as old pipes. Said the building's plumbing dated back to before World War II, and sometimes the sewers backed up funny. That same week, I met Thomas Vance. He came in every Thursday at exactly 6:45, ordered a whiskey neat, and sat at the far end of the bar where the light from the neon beer signs didn't quite reach. He was maybe 70, skin weathered like old leather, with hands that shook just slightly when he lifted his glass. Thomas never said much, but he watched everything. I'd catch him staring at the basement door sometimes, his eyes tracking something I couldn't see. The 4th Thursday I worked there, Thomas finally spoke more than 2 words to me. He waited until the other customers had left, until it was just him and the sound of ice settling in the cooler. Then he asked me if I'd found the journal yet. I told him I didn't know what he meant. He finished his whiskey in one swallow and pushed a $10 bill across the bar. Then he said that every bartender who worked at the Amber Current for more than 2 weeks found the journal. He said some of them were smart enough to leave it alone. His eyes were steady when he added that most weren't. I should have listened. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's mixed with the kind of pride that makes you think you're smarter than the warnings. That Saturday, during the dead hour between lunch and evening crowds, I went down to the cellar. I told myself I was looking for extra bottles of bourbon. Really, I was looking for answers. The stairs were steep, wooden planks that creaked under my weight. The air got colder with each step, heavy with that same burnt sugar smell I'd noticed before. At the bottom, I pulled the chain on the single overhead bulb and found myself in a space larger than I'd expected. Old beer kegs lined one wall. Broken chairs were stacked in a corner. And there, behind a loose brick in the far wall, was the leather journal. The cover was dark brown, cracked along the spine. No title, no markings, except for a symbol pressed into the leather that looked like 3 interlocking circles with a line through the center. Inside, the pages were filled with handwriting that changed every few entries. Different bartenders, I realized. Different years. The earliest entry I could make out was from 1952. Most of it was ordinary. Inventory notes, customer complaints, recipe modifications. But scattered throughout were entries that made my skin prickle. References to something called the Hellfire Shaker. Instructions that read more like warnings. And names. So many names of people who'd ordered the drink, followed by dates and brief notations. None of the notations were good. The last entry was from Marcus Hendricks, the bartender who'd vanished. It was dated August 19th, 3 months before I'd started. He'd written just one sentence. I made it for her again tonight, and I think this time she's going to stay. I took the journal upstairs and hid it in my apartment. For 2 days, I told myself I'd return it, put it back in the wall and forget about it. But those entries kept pulling me back, especially the recipe for the Hellfire Shaker itself. The ingredients were specific. Rye whiskey aged at least 12 years. Absinthe, but only the kind made with grand wormwood. A syrup made from blackstrap molasses and something called Devil's Rope chili, simmered during the new moon. Bitters created from a blend I'd never heard of, including an herb the journal called Bitter Remembrance. And finally, a single drop of blood from the person who'd be drinking it, mixed in while speaking their full name aloud. The instructions ended with a warning in different handwriting, probably added by a later bartender. This drink doesn't get ordered. It calls to those who need to make a bargain. Once served, the debt must be honored or transferred. There is no third option. I thought it was nonsense. Had to be. Some elaborate prank previous bartenders had maintained to scare the new guy. Except the fear in Thomas Vance's eyes had been real. And Duncan's refusal to go near the cellar wasn't just superstition. 2 weeks after I found the journal, she walked in. It was a Tuesday night, unseasonably cold for October. We'd had maybe 6 customers all evening, and by 9:30 they'd all cleared out except for one regular nursing a beer and watching a Broncos game with the sound off. I was wiping down the bar when the door opened, and she stepped inside. She looked about 35, dark hair pulled back tight, wearing a gray coat that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They had the look of someone who'd gone too long without sleep, red-rimmed and desperate in a way that went deeper than exhaustion. She walked straight to the bar and sat down on the stool directly in front of where I stood. Then she said she needed a Hellfire Shaker. I felt something drop in my chest. The regular with the beer didn't react, didn't even look up from his game. It was like he hadn't heard her at all. I asked her to repeat herself, even though I'd heard her perfectly the first time. She repeated it, slower. Said she'd been told this was the place, that someone she trusted had given her the name of the bar and the name of the drink and told her it would solve her problem. Her hands were shaking where they rested on the bar. I could see faint scars on her wrists, old and white against her skin. I told her we didn't serve that drink. Said I'd make her anything else on the menu, on the house. But not that. She didn't argue. She just reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled napkin with the same symbol from the journal drawn on it in blue ink. Underneath the symbol was written one word: Covenant. The regular finished his beer right then, dropped cash on the bar, and left without saying goodnight. I heard his truck start in the parking lot and the sound of gravel crunching under his tires as he pulled away fast. The woman and I were alone in the bar, and the overhead lights seemed dimmer than they'd been a minute before. She said her name was Lydia Carver. She said 3 months ago she'd made a mistake that cost her daughter's life. Not directly, she clarified when she saw my expression, but the kind of mistake that connected like dominoes falling. She'd been working double shifts at a warehouse, tired beyond reason, and she'd fallen asleep at the wheel on her way to pick up her daughter from a friend's house. Rear-ended a truck at a red light. Nothing serious for her, but the delay meant her daughter, waiting alone at a house with no parents home, decided to walk. 2 miles through a neighborhood where a girl alone at twilight wasn't safe. Lydia's voice cracked when she told me they never found who took her daughter. Never found her daughter either, despite the searches and the news coverage and the posters that still hung in windows across Pueblo. 6 weeks of hope that slowly bled into something darker. And then 3 weeks ago, she'd met someone at a support group who'd told her about the Hellfire Shaker. Told her it could give you a chance to fix one moment, change one decision. But the price was steep, and you couldn't refuse to pay once you ordered it. I wanted to tell her it was nonsense, that grief makes people believe in impossible solutions. But I'd read the journal. I'd seen those names and dates, and I'd noticed that several of them corresponded with obituaries I'd looked up online in my apartment late one night when I couldn't sleep. People who'd ordered the drink and then died in accidents within weeks, or disappeared. Or in one case walked into a police station and confessed to a 30-year-old murder they couldn't possibly have committed based on their age. So instead of dismissing her, I asked how she'd gotten my name. She said she hadn't. Said the person at the support group had just told her to come to the Amber Current on a Tuesday night and ask the bartender. Said the right bartender would know what to do. I felt the weight of that journal sitting in my apartment like it was burning a hole through the walls. I thought about Marcus Hendricks, who'd made the drink and then vanished. About the warning, the debt must be honored or transferred. I asked Lydia if she understood what transferred meant in that context. She said she did. Said if the person who made the drink couldn't or wouldn't fulfill the bargain themselves, the debt would pass to them. Said she didn't care. She'd already lost everything that mattered. I should have refused. Told her to leave and never come back. Called Duncan and quit on the spot. But there was something in her face. That raw desperation that I recognized from my own mirror during the worst year of my life. So I made a decision that still haunts me. I told her I needed to close up first. Needed privacy for this. She nodded like she'd expected that and waited while I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Then I went down to the cellar to gather what I needed. The ingredients were mostly there, hidden in places I'd discovered while reading the journal. The rye whiskey in an unmarked bottle behind the old kegs. The absinthe in a green glass container wrapped in cloth. The bitters in a small vial tucked into a gap in the brick wall. Only the syrup was missing, but the journal had listed an alternative. Molasses mixed with cayenne and left in complete darkness for 3 days while a candle burned nearby. I'd made it the week before, telling myself I was just testing whether the recipe was real. The jar was still in the cellar, sitting on a shelf where light never reached it. When I came back upstairs with everything, Lydia was standing at the far end of the bar, looking at a framed photograph I'd never noticed before. It showed the Amber Current in the 1950s, black and white and slightly faded. A group of men stood in front of the building, miners based on their clothing. In the center of the group, someone had scratched out one man's face, the photograph damaged like someone had taken a knife to it deliberately. I asked Lydia to sit back down. She did, slowly, her eyes still on that photograph. I set up the shaker and started measuring ingredients according to the journal's instructions. The whiskey first, exactly 2 ounces. The absinthe, just 1/4 ounce. The syrup, 1 tablespoon. The bitters, 3 drops. As I worked, that burnt sugar smell grew stronger, rising from the drain like something was heating up beneath the floor. Then came the final step. I pulled out a small lancet from the first aid kit we kept behind the bar and sterilized it with alcohol. I asked Lydia for her hand. She extended it without hesitation and I pricked her index finger, letting a single drop of blood fall into the shaker. As it hit the mixture, I spoke her full name the way the journal instructed. Lydia Marie Carver. The lights in the bar flickered once. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. And when I sealed the shaker and began to mix, the liquid inside began to glow faintly, a deep red that pulsed like a heartbeat. I strained it into a coupe glass and set it in front of her. The drink was dark, almost black, with that red glow visible when light hit it at certain angles. Steam rose from it even though I hadn't heated anything. Lydia stared at it for a long moment and I saw tears running down her face. She asked me what would happen when she drank it. I told her what the journal said. She'd be given one chance to return to the moment of her choosing and change a single decision. But the change would cost something of equal value. The universe keeps balance, the journal explained. Save one life, and another is marked. Fix one mistake, and another manifests. Lydia picked up the glass with both hands to keep it steady. She asked what would happen to me for making it. I told her the truth. I didn't know. The journal wasn't clear about bartenders who helped willingly versus those who'd been coerced. All it said was that the debt transfers to the maker if the drinker can't pay. She asked if I wanted her to leave, to take the drink and go somewhere else so I wouldn't have to watch. I told her no. Told her if I was going to be part of this, I needed to see it through. Lydia nodded and lifted the glass to her lips. She drank it in 3 long swallows, and I watched her face change as the liquid went down. Her eyes widened first, then rolled back. Her body went rigid on the stool, back arching. The glass fell from her hands and shattered on the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. For 30 seconds she stayed like that, suspended in some state between consciousness and something else. I stood frozen, watching. Then her body relaxed all at once and she slumped forward, catching herself on the bar with shaking hands. When she looked up at me, her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been before. She said it had worked. Said she'd gone back to that afternoon and instead of falling asleep at the wheel, she'd pulled over and called someone else to pick up her daughter. She'd watched it all like a memory being rewritten, seen her daughter come home safe. Then she said she saw what it had cost. In that rewritten timeline, the person who'd picked up her daughter instead had been in the accident. Not serious, just like hers hadn't been. But the delay meant they were late to somewhere else. And that somewhere else being late had consequences. Lydia's voice broke when she said she'd seen who it was. Her sister, who, in being late to pick up her own son from baseball practice, hadn't been there when he'd gotten in a fight with another kid. A fight that escalated. A fight that ended with her nephew in the hospital with injuries that would take months to heal. Lydia was sobbing now, deep wrenching sounds that came from somewhere beyond grief. She said the drink had shown her the choice. Save her daughter but watch her nephew suffer. Or refuse and let things stay as they were. She'd chosen her daughter. The guilt in her eyes was a living thing. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? She stood up shakily and pulled $200 bills from her coat pocket, laying them on the bar. Then she walked to the door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the October night without looking back. I watched through the window as she got into an old sedan and drove away, her taillights disappearing down the dark street. I stood there in the empty bar with the smell of burnt sugar thick in the air and shattered glass at my feet. My hands were shaking. I looked down and noticed the cut on my finger where I'd pricked Lydia's finger with the lancet. I didn't remember cutting myself, but there it was. A small clean slice that wept a single drop of blood onto the mahogany bar. The blood hit the wood and began to spread in a pattern I recognized. 3 interlocking circles with a line through the center. The same symbol from the journal. The same one on the napkin Lydia had shown me. As I watched, the blood soaked into the wood and vanished, leaving no trace. That's when I understood what transferred meant. I'd made the drink willingly, participated in the bargain. Whatever debt Lydia couldn't or wouldn't pay would come to me. I'd tied myself to something I didn't fully understand, and there was no way to sever the connection. I closed the bar early and went home. Spent the night reading through the entire journal. Every entry from every bartender who'd worked at the Amber Current over the past 70 years. The pattern became clear. Each bartender who'd made the Hellfire Shaker had eventually vanished or died under strange circumstances, but not immediately. First, they'd start seeing things, hearing things. The journal called it the calling. People would appear, desperate and broken, asking for the drink. And each time a bartender refused, the calling got worse, more frequent, more insistent, until finally they either made the drink again or disappeared, consumed by whatever force enforced the bargain. Marcus Hendricks, the bartender before me, had made the drink 17 times according to his entries. Each time he'd transferred a piece of the debt to himself. By the end, his handwriting had deteriorated to barely legible scrawls about a woman he kept seeing. The woman who'd been in his final entry. The one he thought would stay. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lydia's face. That moment of choice reflected in her eyes. And I wondered what my choice would be when the debt came due. The next day, I called in sick to work. Spent the afternoon researching the building's history at the Pueblo Library. The Amber Current had been built in 1919, originally called the Covenant Hall. It had served as a meeting place for miners who'd formed a brotherhood, a group that practiced what old newspapers vaguely called traditional rituals. In 1923, there'd been an accident at one of the mines. 17 men died. The same 17 men who'd been founding members of the Covenant Hall. After the accident, the building had changed hands repeatedly. Each owner had tried different businesses, but none lasted more than a few years. The speakeasy during Prohibition had operated for 6 months before the owner shot himself in the cellar. The Union Hall had closed after a fire that killed 3 people in 1947. For 30 years, it had sat empty, until Duncan Lowell bought it and reopened it as the Amber Current. I found one more detail that made my blood run cold. In the photograph from the library archives showing the Covenant Hall in 1922, I recognized the building. But more than that, I recognized one of the men standing in front. He had his face intact in this version, not scratched out. And he looked exactly like Duncan Lowell. Not similar, identical. The same narrow features, the same thin mouth, the same hollow eyes. That's when I understood that Duncan wasn't just the owner. He was part of whatever curse or bargain had been woven into that building's foundation. Maybe he'd been there from the beginning somehow. Or maybe he'd taken the place of the original owner, stepped into a debt that had consumed the previous person. Either way, he knew exactly what he was doing when he hired me. I thought about running, packing my things and leaving Pueblo without notice. But something told me it wouldn't matter. The symbol had marked me. The debt had transferred. Whatever was coming would find me whether I stayed or fled. I went back to work that Friday. Duncan was there when I arrived, standing behind the bar in a way that felt territorial. He asked if I'd found what I was looking for in the cellar. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. I told him I'd found the journal. He nodded slowly and said every bartender did eventually. Then he asked if I'd made the drink yet. I wanted to lie, but something about his gaze made deception feel impossible. I told him about Lydia, about the Hellfire Shaker, about the symbol that had appeared in my blood. Duncan listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He slid one across to me and raised his own in a toast. He said, "Welcome to the Covenant." Said I'd done what every bartender before me had done and what every bartender after me would do. The drink called to those who needed it, and those who worked at the Amber Current were bound to answer. He'd been answering for a very long time, he added, long enough to know that resistance only made things worse. I asked him what happened to Marcus Hendricks. Duncan took a long drink and said Marcus had tried to break the pattern. Made the drink for a woman 17 times, each time hoping it would satisfy the debt and free him. But the debt doesn't work that way. It multiplies with each drink made. Marcus had accumulated so much debt that when the woman finally stopped coming, the calling consumed him. Duncan had found him in the cellar 3 days after his last entry, though found wasn't quite the right word. There'd been a shape, he said, something that had once been Marcus but wasn't anymore. I felt sick. Asked Duncan why he kept the bar open if he knew what it cost. He said the bar would exist whether he ran it or not. The Covenant Hall had been built on a bargain made by desperate men who'd wanted to save their dying mine. They'd made a deal with something old, something that had been waiting beneath the mountains for someone foolish enough to call it up. The mine had prospered for a few years after that. But the debt came due eventually, the way it always does. 17 men died in that collapse, but that wasn't the end of it. Their deaths had fed the thing they'd summoned, given it a foothold in the world above. The building was its anchor point, and the drink was how it continued to feed. I asked what it fed on. Duncan said choices, regrets, the moment between what was and what might have been. Every person who drank the Hellfire Shaker gave it access to that moment, let it reach into the fabric of their timeline and make changes. But changes require energy, require sacrifice. The drink didn't create outcomes from nothing. It shifted them, moved consequences around like pieces on a board, and every shift weakened the boundary between what was real and what the thing beneath wanted to make real. I wanted to throw the whiskey in his face and walk out, but I couldn't. The mark was on me now. I could feel it sometimes, a cold weight in my chest that grew heavier when I stood behind the bar, and I'd started seeing them. People who'd appear at the edge of my vision, always desperate, always looking for something I knew I shouldn't give them. The first one after Lydia came 2 weeks later. A man in his 50s with a wedding ring he kept turning on his finger. He sat down and ordered a Hellfire Shaker before I could even ask what he wanted. Said his son had died from an overdose 6 months ago, and he needed a chance to go back to the night it happened. To make a different choice. To say something other than the angry words that had driven his son out of the house and into the arms of dealers who didn't care if he lived or died. I made the drink. Watched him go through the same process Lydia had. Saw him make his choice and saw the horror in his eyes when he understood the cost. His son lived in the revised timeline, but his daughter, who in the original timeline had been the stable, successful one, developed an addiction of her own. The balance maintained itself. The second one came in December. A woman who wanted to save her husband from the car accident that had left him paralyzed. She drank the Hellfire Shaker and saved him, but in doing so, she shifted the accident to a different time, a different road. 3 other people died in that alternate collision. People who had lived in the original timeline. The woman left the bar screaming, unable to bear the weight of what she'd chosen. The third, the fourth, the fifth, they kept coming, drawn by the same force that had drawn Lydia, and each time, I felt the debt grow heavier. The symbol on my finger where I'd cut myself had become a permanent scar, visible only in certain lights. And I'd started having dreams about the cellar, about something moving in the darkness below the bar, something old and patient. I tried to research ways to break the binding, spent weeks in libraries and online forums dedicated to occult history, but everything I found said the same thing. Bargains made with entities like this couldn't be broken, only transferred or fulfilled. And fulfillment required a sacrifice equivalent to what had been given. 17 lives had started this. 17 lives would be needed to end it. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? That I was making supernatural cocktails that let people rewrite their timelines. They'd think I was insane. And besides, I'd seen what happened to people who tried to expose the Covenant. There'd been a journalist in 1967 who'd started investigating the building's history. His last article had mentioned the Hellfire Shaker and promised a full expose. He died in a house fire 3 days later. The article was never published. By March, I'd made the drink 11 times. Each person who'd ordered it had made their choice and paid their price. And I'd absorbed a piece of each debt, felt it accumulate in my chest like weight dragging me down. I started seeing the thing in the cellar more clearly. Not with my eyes exactly, but with something deeper, a sense of vast patient hunger waiting below. Duncan told me it would get easier. Said after enough time I'd accept it the way he had. But I could see what acceptance had cost him. He was hollow, a shell performing the motions of running a bar while something else pulled the strings. I didn't want to become that, so I made a decision. The journal had mentioned one exception to the pattern. One way a bartender had avoided being consumed. It required willingly taking on all the accumulated debt at once and then offering yourself as the final payment. Not suicide exactly, more like voluntary dissolution. Stepping into the thing's domain and letting it take everything, but in doing so, satisfying the bargain completely. The building would release its hold. The next bartender would start fresh, unmarked. I didn't want to die. But I'd watched 12 people make impossible choices because I'd given them the means to do so. I'd felt each of their debts settle into me like stones. And I'd started having moments where I couldn't remember if I was Jason Fox, or if I was just another iteration of the role the building needed filled. I waited until a Tuesday night, the same night Lydia had first walked in. The bar was empty. I locked the front door and went down to the cellar with the journal and a bottle of the whiskey used in the Hellfire Shaker. The smell of burnt sugar was overwhelming, rising from the floor drain in waves. I opened the journal to a blank page and wrote my final entry. Explained what I'd learned and what I was about to do. Added a warning to whoever found it next. The debt can be refused, but refusal has its own cost. Better to never start than to try to stop halfway through. Then I poured the whiskey directly onto the floor, speaking the names of everyone who'd drunk the Hellfire Shaker while I'd worked there. 12 names. 12 debts I was calling due. The whiskey soaked into the old wood and began to glow with that same red light I'd seen in the shaker. The temperature dropped until frost formed on the brick walls, and the thing beneath answered. I can't describe what I saw because I don't think human perception is built to process it. But I felt it rise through the floor, felt it reach for me with something that wasn't quite hands, felt it begin to take what I was offering. The weight in my chest lifted as each debt transferred, and with it, pieces of myself. Memories. Identity. The sense of being a discrete individual. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But more than that, I felt relief. The bargain was ending. The cycle was breaking. Whatever came after this, at least I wouldn't be responsible for making another person choose between impossible options. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of the cellar door opening above me, footsteps on the stairs, Duncan's voice calling my name, and the realization that I'd made a mistake. The building didn't want a willing sacrifice. It wanted the cycle to continue. By offering myself, I'd only proven that I understood the true nature of the bargain, which meant I was ready to take Duncan's place, to become the next keeper of the Covenant. I'm still at the Amber Current, still pouring drinks and making small talk with regulars, still going down to the cellar when the new bartenders start their shifts and leaving the journal where they'll eventually find it. Duncan left 3 days after that night in March, walked out the door and never came back, the way Marcus Hendricks had, the way I should have. The thing is, I remember being Jason Fox, remember tending bar in Louisville and Baltimore and a dozen other cities, but those memories feel thin now, like photographs fading in sunlight. What feels real is the covenant, the weight of the building's history, the knowledge that when someone walks through that door with desperation in their eyes, I'll know what drink to make. And the part that keeps me awake sometimes, when the bar's empty and the night is quiet, is this. I can't remember if I actually tried to sacrifice myself that night or if that's just a story the building wants me to believe. Can't remember if Duncan was ever real, or if he's just another role that gets filled. The journal has so many entries, so many different hands, but when I look closely, they all seem to blur together. Maybe there's never been more than one bartender here. Maybe we're all the same, just wearing different names and faces across different years. Maybe that's what the thing beneath really feeds on. Not choices or regrets, but the slow dissolution of identity until there's nothing left but the role itself. They'll find this journal eventually, the next bartender or the one after that. They'll read these entries and think they're different, think they can break the pattern or outwit the bargain. And maybe they're right. Maybe the one reading this right now is the exception, but probably not. So here's what I want to know. From you listening to this story, have you ever felt pulled toward something you knew was wrong but couldn't resist? Have you ever made a choice that seemed like the only option at the time, only to realize later that you'd stepped into something far bigger than you understood? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone, and who knows, maybe your experience will be the next one I share here. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, real stories from my years behind bars across America, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story, if you dare.